By the time the auctioneer realized the forgotten garage was worth more than most moons, the human had already signed the receipt. I was standing 3 rows behind him when it happened, close enough to see the ink dry on the ownership slate, and far enough away to pretend I had not laughed with everyone else. The place was called Dockyard 9, though most of us called it the Bone Lot, because that was where dead machines went to be stripped, sold, and forgotten. Old cargo haulers with missing engines, cracked fuel tanks, broken service bots stacked like empty soda cans behind a gas station in Nevada. Nothing beautiful ever came through Dockyard 9. Nothing important. And certainly nothing that should have belonged to a human in a faded brown jacket who looked like he had wandered out of a roadside repair shop instead of a galactic auction house. His name was Caleb Walker. Earthborn. Male. White skin, short sandy hair, calm gray eyes, and hands rough enough that even my translator tagged them as labor adapted. That was the first thing I noticed. Not his height, though he was small by station standards, barely 6 feet in work boots. Not his primitive canvas tool bag. His hands. They looked like they had solved problems before his mouth ever got involved. The auctioneer, a thin blue Virani with 4 jeweled fingers and a voice like a cash register choking on coins, waved toward the final lot of the day. Unit 7B, he announced, abandoned mechanical storage garage, unknown origin, no active power, no certified inventory, no warranty, no refund, no liability coverage. Starting bid, 100 credits. No one moved. Someone clicked their mandibles in amusement. Someone else muttered that even scrap dealers had standards. The garage appeared on the overhead hollow as a black rectangular box buried under 2 centuries of dust, tucked behind a collapsed maintenance corridor on the edge of the station. Its door was dented. Its registry was corrupted. Its access panel had been burned so badly the metal had bubbled outward like melted cheese on a diner grill. It was trash. Expensive trash, because moving it would cost more than anything inside could possibly be worth. Then the human raised one hand. 100, Caleb said. The entire auction hall turned toward him. You have to understand, humans were new enough in our sector to still be funny. Soft mammals from a heavy little planet. Always fixing things they should replace. Always buying junk with that strange, stubborn confidence of a man at a yard sale who thinks the rusty lawn mower only needs a new spark plug. Voriksen laughed first. He was Carvex, broad-shouldered, scale-skinned, rich from salvage contracts, and cruel in that lazy way wealthy predators become when the law starts sounding like background music. Earthman, he called, loud enough for the hall to hear. That garage has killed 3 professional bids and embarrassed 2 engineering guilds. Caleb glanced at the hollow, then at Vorik. Did it kill them, or did they quit? The laughter changed shape. It did not stop, exactly, but it bent around the human like wind around a locked door. Vorik stepped closer, his polished boots striking the deck with deliberate weight. You think you can open what the guilds could not? Caleb reached into his jacket, pulled out a flat metal coin, and rolled it across his knuckles without looking down. Back home, he said, we have barns older than your guilds. Sometimes the trick is not asking the door for permission. The auctioneer's smile twitched. 100 credits from the human. Any other bids? Silence. Not because no one wanted the garage. Because no one wanted to be seen wanting something after a human did. Going once. Going twice. Sold. Caleb Walker walked to the front, pressed his thumb to the slate, and bought the most worthless room on Dockyard 9. That was what we believed for exactly 9 minutes. Then the station scanners tried to register his new property, touched whatever was sleeping inside that garage, and every light in the auction hall turned gold. Gold light meant one of 2 things on Dockyard 9. Royal property or catastrophic accounting error, and none of us liked either option. The auctioneer froze with his jeweled fingers still above the registry slate, while every scanner in the ceiling turned toward the newly purchased garage like a flock of nervous birds. Caleb Walker did not celebrate. He did not shout. He did not even smile the way humans usually smiled when they accidentally survived something stupid. He just looked at the gold warning glow, tilted his head a little, and said, "That is new." I hated how calm he sounded. Around us, the auction hall began doing what crowds always do when fear arrives, wearing confusion as a jacket. They whispered. They stepped back. They pretended they had not been laughing 9 minutes earlier. The station valuation system flickered across the overhead hollow, trying to classify Unit 7B. First it called the garage inactive storage, then restricted mechanical asset, then historical military property. Then the words vanished completely and were replaced by a spinning red notice that said manual review required. Vorkson stopped laughing. That was the first honest thing he had done all day. His scales shifted from blue-gray to a darker shade near the throat, a Carvex stress response my species was polite enough not to mention out loud. He turned on the auctioneer with a voice suddenly stripped of amusement. Cancel the sale. The auctioneer blinked all 4 eyelids. I cannot cancel a finalized lot without legal cause. Legal cause is standing right there, Vorik snapped, pointing at Caleb as if the human had crawled out of a sewer pipe and stolen a crown. Unknown species buyer, corrupted asset history, possible restricted technology. Choose one. Caleb slid the ownership slate into the inside pocket of his jacket. His movement was slow, almost lazy, but every security drone in the room tracked it. That was when I noticed the second strange thing about him. He was not looking at Vorik. He was looking past him, through the glass wall of the auction hall, toward the far end of the salvage dock, where the garage waited behind a sealed blast door. Most beings looked at danger. Humans looked at problems. Caleb walked toward the exit. 2 of Vorik's hired handlers moved to block him, both taller than him, both wearing polished salvage armor with shoulder plates wide enough to park a motorcycle on. One placed a hand against Caleb's chest. Not hard, just enough to humiliate him in front of the room. Sir, the handler said, you should remain here until ownership is clarified. Caleb looked down at the hand, then up at the handler. I own a garage. I am going to inspect it. The handler leaned closer. The human did not move. For a second, nothing happened, and that nothing became louder than an alarm. Then Caleb lifted one finger and tapped the handler's wrist. Not a strike, not a threat, just a mechanic testing a loose belt. The armor's wrist servo chirped, unlocked, and dropped the handler's own hand harmlessly to his side. The handler stared at it in disbelief. Caleb stepped around him. Vorik's face tightened. How did you do that? Caleb kept walking. Cheap servo. Bad maintenance. That answer should not have frightened anyone. It frightened everyone. Because the handler's armor was Carvex military salvage, certified, expensive, and supposedly secure. Caleb had disabled it with one touch and the bored tone of a man explaining why a pickup truck would not start. We followed him, of course. Curiosity is the galaxy's most common disease, and I was already infected. Down the long corridor, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. The lights near Unit 7B flickered gold, then white, then gold again, as if the station itself could not decide whether to welcome the human or warn him away. The sealed garage door stood 12 feet high, black with age, its surface covered in dust thick enough to hide entire centuries. Caleb stopped 3 feet from it. He crouched, rubbed 2 fingers along the floor, and lifted them to his nose. Ozone, he said. Burn copper. Vorik scoffed from behind us, though softer this time. Any dock rat could smell that. Caleb glanced back. Sure, but the burn mark points inward. Something inside tried to keep people out. Then he touched the ruined access panel, and deep behind the door, something enormous woke up. The sound behind the door was not a growl, not a motor, not anything my translator understood. It was the deep, layered hum of a machine remembering that it had once been important. Dust shook loose from the ceiling in soft gray curtains. The blast door split down the center, not opening with the smooth confidence of modern technology, but dragging itself apart inch by inch like an old bank vault in a forgotten town. Everyone stepped back except Caleb Walker. He leaned forward. That was the third strange thing about humans. Their survival instincts appeared to work backward. When a sealed alien structure woke up after 200 years, sensible species found a wall to hide behind. Caleb reached into his canvas bag and pulled out a flashlight. A flashlight. Not a scanner, not a shield emitter, not a military probe. A little metal tube from Earth that clicked in his hand and threw a white beam into the darkness. Vorikson made a sound of disbelief. You are going in there with that? Caleb looked over his shoulder. It has fresh batteries. Then he crossed the threshold. The garage was not a room. It was a cavern wearing the legal description of a room. The ceiling rose at least 60 feet above us, lost behind hanging chains, folded lifts, and suspended tracks thick with dust. Vehicles slept under gray covers the size of houses. Tool arms hung from the walls like frozen insects. Along the back, a row of service drones stood in charging alcoves, their heads bowed, their limbs tucked in, patient as church statues. Caleb swept the light across the floor and stopped on a line of black scoring that ran from the entrance to a collapsed workbench. He crouched again. Same burn pattern, he said. Directional. Something fired from over there. I looked where he pointed and saw nothing except a dead drone with one cracked optical lens. Then the lens turned red. The entire row of drones lit up, one after another. Vorik backed into one of his handlers. I will admit this now because honesty is easier after survival. I made a very undignified noise. The first drone stepped from its alcove, 7 feet of antique alloy with a tool arm rotating too smoothly for something older than my grandmother's house. A warning tone filled the garage. Unauthorized biological presence detected. Caleb stood slowly. Owner present, he said, holding up the slate. The drone paused. For one beautiful second, I thought that would work. Then it answered, ownership database corrupted. Sterilizing. Inspection zone. A bright line swept across the floor toward him, cutting through dust and loose screws with surgical precision. Caleb moved before the rest of us understood what was happening. Not fast like a predator. Fast like a man who had already decided where every object in the room belonged. He kicked an old wool rim across the floor. The beam struck it, bounced into a hanging chain, and the chain dropped just enough to tangle the drone's rotating arm. The drone corrected. Caleb was already at the workbench. He grabbed a rusted socket wrench, tossed it once to feel the weight, then looked at the drone with mild disappointment. You have timing issues. The machine advanced. Caleb stepped sideways, let its own momentum carry it onto a slick patch of old lubricant, and tapped the side of its knee joint with the wrench. Not hard. Exact. The joint locked. The drone folded into a seated position with a polite mechanical chirp, as if it had decided to take a break. No smoke. No explosion. No heroic shouting. Just a dead silent garage full of alien witnesses realizing that a human had turned a military service unit into furniture with a flashlight, a wheel rim, and one borrowed wrench. Caleb crouched beside the disabled drone, opened a small service panel, and whistled softly. Well, that is interesting. Vorik swallowed. What? Caleb pulled out a thin strip of metal stamped with a symbol none of us had seen outside history archives. This was not a garage for cars, he said. This was a garage for warships. The symbol on that metal strip should not have existed anywhere outside a museum vault. 3 cross stars inside a broken circle. I had seen it once in a military history course I failed twice, mostly because ancient wars seemed less useful than learning how to bribe a customs inspector. It belonged to the Terran Vault Fleet, a civilization so rich, so paranoid, and so mechanically brilliant that half the modern galaxies still use their patents without understanding the original math. Then one day, the Vault Fleet vanished. Not defeated, not conquered, vanished. Their shipyards went dark, their accounts froze, their maps corrupted, and every government within. 20 jumps spent the next 2 centuries pretending they were not still searching for what had been left behind. Caleb Walker held the strip between 2 dirty fingers and looked more annoyed than impressed. Old fleet mark, he said. Vorik's sand moved closer, so quickly his handlers nearly tripped over him. Give me that. Caleb closed his hand. No. That single word landed harder than any speech. Vorik's throat scales darkened again. Human, you do not understand what you are touching. That is exactly why I am touching it slowly, Caleb said. He walked toward the center of the garage, where the dust lay in a wide circle, so smooth it looked poured. He knelt, brushed his palm across the floor, and revealed a seam. Not a crack. A seam. Perfectly round, maybe 30 feet across, hidden beneath 200 years of grime. The station administrator, who had arrived sweating through 3 layers of formal robes, made a tiny squeaking sound. Is that a lift platform? Caleb tapped the metal twice. Too heavy for a car. Too reinforced for storage. He ran his light along the edge until the beam caught a second mark, then a third, all arranged around the circle like numbers on a clock. Vorik suddenly smiled, and I disliked that smile immediately. The sale is invalid, he announced. Under salvage inheritance law, any Vault Fleet military asset belongs to the nearest licensed recovery authority. That would be me. The administrator swallowed. That statute applies only to unclaimed assets. The human has registered ownership. Vorik held out one armored hand. Then the human can surrender the slate for review. One of his handlers reached for Caleb's jacket pocket. He did not lunge. He did not shout. He just made the mistake of assuming calm meant permission. Caleb caught the handler's wrist with one hand and turned it half an inch. The armor locked. The handler's knees buckled from his own suit's safety response, and he sat down very carefully on the dusty floor. No injury. No drama. Just complete mechanical embarrassment. Caleb looked at Vorik. Your people really need better maintenance schedules. The garage lights pulsed. The round platform answered him with a low metallic click. Caleb turned away from Vorik like the argument had become background noise and placed the Varan strip into a slot none of us had noticed. The floor recognized it. Lines of blue-white energy spread across the circle, tracing old circuits beneath the dust. The lift descended 6 inches, then stopped. A voice filled the garage, elegant, ancient, and cold enough to make my bones remember they were optional. Primary hangar seal awaiting owner verification. Vorik whispered something in Carvex that my translator politely refused to process. Caleb wiped his thumb on his jeans, looked at the glowing console, and asked the most human question possible. What happens if I press the big one? The administrator actually stepped behind me. Vorik shouted for him to stop. Caleb pressed it anyway. The platform unlocked. The hidden floor opened, and below us, stacked in silent rows under the garage like sleeping sharks beneath black water, were engines the size of houses, silver hull plates marked with the Vault Fleet crest, and one central door stamped with a valuation seal that made every financial scanner in the room start screaming. The first scanner gave up before the second one finished counting. That is not a joke. Station valuation systems were designed to price asteroid mines, royal estates, captured cruisers, and whatever ridiculous art collectors were paying for statues made of frozen sound that year. They did not panic easily. But the moment their beams touched the chamber below Caleb Walker's new garage, the numbers climbed so fast the hollow display blurred into gold static. 100 billion. 400 billion. 900 billion. Then the system flashed a warning I had never seen in my life. Value exceeds standard commercial ceiling. The administrator whispered, impossible. Caleb leaned over the opening with his flashlight in one hand and his old wrench in the other. He looked down at the sleeping engines, the sealed crates, the silver hull plates stacked like pancakes in a Kansas diner, and said, well, that explains the fancy door. Then the final estimate landed across every public screen on Dockyard 9. $2 trillion, minimum recoverable. Value. Nobody breathed. I mean that literally. 3 species in the room required constant atmospheric cycling, and even their chest vents stopped moving. Voriksen stared at the number as if it had personally insulted his family. The auctioneer sat down without checking whether a chair was behind him. The administrator began repeating legal phrases under his breath, like prayers. And Caleb, the human who had bought it all for 100 credits, scratched the side of his jaw and asked, does that include labor? That was when Greed entered the garage wearing armor. Vorik raised one hand, and 6 salvage enforcers spread out behind Caleb in a half circle. Their boots were quiet on the dust, but the garage heard them anyway. Little lights woke along the walls. Not alarms. Attention. The place was listening. Human, Vorik said, very carefully now, step away from the platform. Caleb did not turn around. I am still inspecting my property. You purchased an abandoned surface unit, not an underground Vault Fleet repository. That distinction will matter in court. Caleb nodded slowly, still looking down into the chamber. Maybe, but court is not in this garage. I am. The enforcers moved. Not fast enough. Caleb tossed his flashlight upward. It spun once, struck a hanging reflector, and filled the entire garage with hard white light. Shadows jumped. Sensors blinked. The old service drone he had disabled earlier chirped from the floor, rebooting into maintenance mode, because Caleb had left one wire crossed on purpose. I realized that at the exact same time Vorik did. The human had not simply beaten the machine. He had recruited it. The drone rolled between Caleb and the enforcers, extended a welding shield, and projected a bright safety barrier across the walkway. No one was hurt. No one had to be. Vorik's men stopped because every suit they wore suddenly displayed the same warning. Unauthorized personnel in active work zone. Caleb finally turned around. His face was calm, but his eyes had gone flat and focused, the way Earth oceans look before storms on old weather footage. Back home, he said, When someone walks into a working garage without permission, they get one. Warning. Vorik bared his teeth. You think a repair room can protect you? Caleb tapped the wrench against his palm, once. No. I think a repair room knows who is breaking the rules. The floor answered with a deep metallic thump. Magnetic clamps rose from the dust and locked onto the enforcer's boots, holding them in place as gently and completely as a parent holding a child away from a hot stove. Panic flickered through the room. Caleb stepped past them, unhurried, and approached the central door at the bottom of the lift. Its seal glowed brighter with every step he took. Owner proximity confirmed, the ancient voice said. Vorik's confidence finally cracked. Walker, listen to me. You do not know what that vault contains. Caleb placed his hand on the control panel. Then I guess I bought myself a surprise. The door opened 1 inch, and every weapon detector on the station shut itself down out of fear. The silence after the weapon detectors failed was worse than an alarm. Alarms tell you what kind of trouble you are in. Silence lets your imagination do the paperwork. Every armed badge, every security drone, every private scanner on Dockyard 9 went blank at the same time, as if the station had looked through that 1-inch opening and decided ignorance was safer. Vorik Sen understood the danger before the rest of us did. His eyes cut toward the exit, then toward Caleb, then toward the vault door. Greed and fear fought across his face, and greed won by half a second. Override the work zone, he ordered. His enforcers began forcing their boots against the magnetic clamps, armor joints whining under the strain. Caleb did not rush. He looked at the ancient control panel, then at the disabled service drone, then up at the ceiling rails. I watched the thought move through him like electricity through copper. Not panic. Planning. He pulled a small roll of black tape from his canvas bag and wrapped it around 2 exposed wires near the panel. Vorik actually laughed. Tape. The human brought tape to a vault breach. Caleb pressed the wires together. The entire garage woke up. Not violently. Professionally. Ceiling lights snapped on in rows. Lift arms unfolded. 4 tracks. Unlocked. Tool cabinets opened with soft mechanical clicks. A yellow line appeared around Caleb's boots and formed a perfect circle. The ancient voice returned, smoother now, stronger. Authorized mechanic recognized. Hazardous personnel detected. Initiating shop safety protocol. That phrase did not sound terrifying. It should have. A cargo chain dropped from above and hooked the back of one enforcer's armor, lifting him 6 inches off the floor and leaving him hanging there like an overpacked suitcase. A second enforcer raised a plasma cutter, but a wall-mounted arm extended, scanned the tool, and covered it in a bright orange safety sleeve labeled improper use. The cutter shut down. A third tried to circle behind Caleb and walked directly onto a rolling service tray that slid him gently, helplessly, into a stack of foam packing blocks. No bruises. No broken bones. Just humiliation delivered with factory precision. Caleb moved through the chaos like he had been born in that garage. He slapped a switch, spun a pressure wheel, and kicked a floor pedal without looking down. Every motion did something useful. A hydraulic lift rose between him and Vorik's line of sight. A curtain of welding glass dropped to block a charge. A magnetic crane swept low and collected 3 loose rifles from armored hands as neatly as a kid picking up toys before dinner. Vorik roared in frustration and stepped onto the platform himself, armor glowing with private command codes. I am licensed salvage authority, he shouted. Recognize my rank. The garage paused. For one terrible moment, I thought it was considering him. Then the ancient voice answered, rank irrelevant. Ownership active. Caleb looked over the edge of the vault doorway and gave the smallest nod, as if thanking an old coworker. Vorik lunged forward, not to strike him, but to shove past him and reach the control panel. Caleb turned 1 dial. The gravity in the room shifted. Not much. Not enough to harm anyone. Just enough to remind every alien body present that Earth had raised Caleb Walker on a planet where even standing up was a lifelong workout. The Carvex stumbled. The enforcers dropped to 1 knee. I grabbed a railing. With 3 hands and a prayer. Caleb only adjusted his stance. His boots did not slide an inch. He walked to Vorik, reached up, and tapped the chest plate of the expensive armor with 2 fingers. The suit powered down into inspection mode and locked open at every joint. Vorik stood frozen, unharmed, furious, and suddenly very quiet. Caleb leaned close enough for only the front row to hear, but the garage microphones carried it to all of us anyway. You tried to steal from a mechanic inside his own shop. That is brave, I will give you that. The old service drone rolled up beside him and chirped. Caleb glanced at it. Reckless is probably the better word. The garage lights turned green. The safety barriers lifted. Every enforcer remained neatly restrained, tagged, and documented for station security. Caleb wiped his hands on his jeans, picked up his flashlight from the floor, and stepped through the vault door as if the most powerful salvage crew on Dockyard 9 had been nothing more than a stubborn oil stain. Inside the vault, the word treasure suddenly felt embarrassingly small. We had expected gold, credit cores, maybe antique weapon stockpiles with enough insurance value to make governments sweat. What Caleb Walker found was stranger, cleaner, and much more dangerous. The chamber stretched beneath the garage like an underground aircraft hangar, easily 300 feet long, with polished black floors that had not collected a single grain of dust. Rows of engine cores rested in suspension cradles, each one humming softly beneath transparent shields. Not dead machines, sleeping machines. Along the left wall stood sealed cabinets labeled in Old Terran script, and when the administrator translated the first line, his voice cracked. Navigation seeds, he whispered. Pre-collapse, jump mathematics. Vorik, still locked in his powered-down armor near the platform above us, went completely still. Even from where he stood, he understood. Jump mathematics were not treasure the way diamonds were treasure. They were roads. Secret roads. Routes through space that modern charts could not see. Caleb walked deeper into the chamber, flashlight beam moving over the smooth hull of a compact engine no larger than a pickup truck. A pickup truck that could apparently push a cruiser across half a sector without refueling. He gave it a light tap with his knuckle and listened to the sound. Solid build, he said. My translator offered 7 possible interpretations for that phrase, all of them too casual. The ancient voice filled the chamber again. Owner recognized. Inventory summary available. Caleb looked up. Go ahead. A hollow bloomed above the floor, and every being present forgot how to blink. 17 maintenance sites. 43 reserve drives. 9 autonomous repair foundries. 2 incomplete escort frames. 1 strategic archive. Estimated replacement value beyond current galactic market model. Vorik made a strained noise. He was no longer angry. Anger requires believing the universe still makes sense. This was something else. This was a predator realizing the rabbit had purchased the forest. The administrator stepped toward Caleb with both hands raised in a peaceful gesture. Mr. Walker, under interstellar law, assets of this scale may require provisional oversight. Caleb kept reading the hollow. Oversight by who? The administrator hesitated. A council committee. Caleb finally looked at him. The same council that let this place sit behind a broken door for 200 years? Nobody answered. That was the 4th thing I learned about humans. They could make silence feel like a verdict. Then the archive activated. A column of light rose from the center of the chamber, forming a map of the sector, then the neighboring sectors, then places beyond the public charts where the stars were marked in silver instead of white. Each silver mark pulsed with the same symbol. 3 cross stars inside a broken circle. Vorik found his voice. Walker, you cannot keep this. Caleb turned slowly. Why not? Because no single species should control a network like that. Caleb looked at the map, then at the old machines, then down at his grease-stained hands. I do not control it, he said. I bought the garage. The garage came with unfinished work. The service drone chirped behind him, as if approving the distinction. Then one of the silver stars on the map blinked red. A message unfolded in the air, ancient and urgent. External claim attempt detected at maintenance site 12. Unauthorized salvage fleet inbound. Vorik's face changed. He knew that fleet. We all did. His company had not come alone. Caleb sighed. The way a tired mechanic sighs when someone brings in a car after ignoring the warning light for 6 months. He picked up a Terran access key from the console, rolled his shoulders once, and said, All right. Show me which one of these still starts. The machine Caleb chose did not look like a ship at first. It looked like a mistake someone had parked in the middle of a cathedral. 30 feet long, 12 feet high, matte silver, with no cockpit glass, no visible engines, and no decorative fins, because apparently the Terran Vault fleet had skipped every design meeting involving intimidation and gone straight to physics. Caleb walked around it once, dragging his flashlight beam over the hull, checking seams, vents, access plates, and a row of old manual latches that no modern engineer would have touched without 6 permits and a therapist. The ancient voice identified it as a maintenance escort frame. Vorik laughed from the lift platform above, still trapped in his open armor, but finding enough pride to sound poisonous. That is not a warship, Walker. That is a service tug. Caleb opened a side panel and looked inside. Good. Tugs have torque. I did not know what that meant, but the garage did, and that worried me. Outside Dockyard 9, Vorik's private salvage fleet dropped out of jump like wolves arriving at a picnic. 12 recovery ships, all painted in Carvex black, all broadcasting legal claim codes so aggressive the station traffic system immediately filed 3 complaints. Their lead captain opened a channel that echoed through the vault. Unknown occupants, surrender vault fleet property, and prepare for transfer of ownership. Caleb leaned into the service tug and pulled a lever. Nothing happened. Vorik smiled wider. Then Caleb pulled it again, harder, the way humans pull lawnmower cords in old Earth videos, and the entire vault shook as the machine woke with a low, stubborn rumble. The sound was not elegant. It was not alien. It sounded like a truck starting on a cold Michigan morning after the owner promised it just needed a minute. Caleb grinned for the first time. There you go. The tug lifted 6 inches off the floor. Every alien in the chamber backed away. Caleb climbed into the maintenance cradle, which adjusted around him like it had been waiting 2 centuries for someone unreasonable enough to sit there. The administrator shouted that unauthorized launch procedures were extremely illegal. Caleb looked over his shoulder. So his attempted theft, probably. The tug shot up the access shaft, not fast, but with the unstoppable confidence of farm equipment crossing a fence line. On the external screens, we watched it emerge from the garage bay into open dock space, a dull little service craft facing 12 armed salvage ships. The Carvex captain actually paused before speaking. Human pilot, power down your utility craft. Caleb opened the station channel. No. The fleet advanced. Targeting lights painted the tug from 12 directions. I waited for panic. I waited for begging. Caleb did neither. He turned on the tug's work lights. That was all. 6 white beams struck the nearest salvage ship, scanned it, and marked every loose panel, cracked coolant pipe, overloaded relay, and overdue safety violation across its hull. Then the tug fired magnetic tow clamps. Not weapons. Tow clamps. They snapped onto the lead ship and yanked it sideways into the second ship's path, forcing both vessels to brake so hard their own computers screamed collision warnings across the public channel. Caleb rotated the tug, locked onto 3 more ships, and dragged them into a perfect line like trailers behind a pickup. The salvage fleet tried to scatter. The tug was already moving. It slipped under them, over them, around them, using dock cranes, cargo buoys, and station traffic lanes like Caleb had grown up parallel parking starships behind a grocery store. Every time a Carvex ship charged, the tug clipped it with a safety tether and parked it somewhere embarrassing. One ended up pinned gently against a fuel depot bumper. Another was spun in place until its captain announced immediate surrender just to stop the nausea. The last ship tried to run. Caleb caught it with the longest tow cable I had ever seen and pulled it backward into a reserved inspection lane. 12 ships. 7 minutes. 0 casualties. Complete humiliation. Inside the garage, Vorik stopped smiling. Caleb brought the tug back through the bay doors, settled it onto the vault floor, and climbed out with grease on his cheek and dust on his jacket. He walked straight to Vorik, who suddenly looked much smaller inside all that expensive armor. Caleb tapped the frozen chest plate once. Your fleet needs maintenance too. The garage voice followed with perfect timing. Unauthorized claim attempt resolved. Owner performance satisfactory. Vorik lowered his eyes first. That was when the room understood the real imbalance. The treasure was not the engines. It was not the map. It was not even the $2 trillion. It was the humans standing in the middle of it all, treating ancient alien technology like a stubborn old work truck he had every intention of fixing. By the time station security arrived, there was nothing left for them to secure except 12 embarrassed salvage ships, 1 very quiet Carvex executive, and a human mechanic asking whether Dockyard 9 had decent coffee. That was how the greatest ownership dispute in our sector ended. Not with a fleet battle. Not with a council decree. not with some ancient prophecy carved into a glowing wall. It ended with Caleb Walker wiping grease off his fingers, looking around a vault worth more than small nations, and wondering if the break room still worked. The administrator tried to regain control by standing taller, which was difficult because his knees were still shaking. "Mr. Walker," he said, "the station recognizes your legal purchase, but given the historic nature of these assets, we must file an emergency notification with the Galactic Council." Caleb nodded. "Makes sense. And until they respond, access must be limited to approved personnel." Caleb nodded again. "Also makes sense. And all movement of Vault Fleet material must be frozen." Caleb finally looked at him. "That does not make sense." The administrator blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Caleb pointed toward the overhead screens, where Maintenance Site 12 still flashed red on the ancient map. Then another site flickered yellow. Then a third. The galaxy had noticed the garage waking up, and scavengers everywhere were already smelling money through the walls. "You freeze this place," Caleb said, "and every one of those sites gets stripped by people with bigger engines and worse manners. You let me work, and maybe we keep this from turning into a feeding frenzy." No one liked that answer because no one could argue with it. Vorik San, still locked inside inspection mode, tried one last time to sound important. "You are one man from a primitive world." Caleb turned toward him slowly. The garage lights followed his movement. "One man with the keys," he said. That should have sounded arrogant. It did not. It sounded like a fact printed on a receipt. The ancient system confirmed it a second later. Primary owner Caleb Walker. Custodial authority active. Network stabilization pending. Recommended action, repair. Caleb smiled faintly at that word. Repair. Of course that was the recommendation that won him over. Not conquest. Not wealth. Not domination. Repair. He walked back into the vault, selected 3 service drones, and gave them tasks with the casual rhythm of someone ordering parts from an auto shop in Ohio. 1 to inventory the engines. 1 to secure the map. 1 to unlock communications with Earth. The administrator nearly choked. "Earth?" Caleb shrugged. "I am going to need help." "You are informing your government?" "Not yet. I am calling my brother. He runs a machine shop outside Tulsa." That was the moment I truly understood why the room had chosen him. Every species in that garage saw a $2 trillion treasure and immediately imagined power. Caleb saw unfinished work and thought of family, tools, labor, and a guy in Oklahoma who probably knew how to fix old pumps. When the call connected, the holo showed another human male in a stained work shirt, holding a sandwich in one hand and squinting at the screen like Caleb had interrupted lunch. "Caleb," he said, "where are you?" Caleb looked around at the ancient engines, the glowing star, map, the silent machines waiting for orders, and the alien crowd holding its breath. "Bought a garage," he said. "Might need you to bring the big diagnostic kit." His brother stared for 3 full seconds. Then he asked, "Is this another one of those problems where the cheap fix turns expensive?" Caleb glanced at the $2 trillion estimate still hovering above the vault door. "Something like that." The news spread before the call ended. Across Dockyard 9, across the trade lanes, across every council channel that had once laughed at human salvage licenses, the story changed shape with every retelling. A human had bought a dead garage. A human had opened a Vault Fleet site. A human had stopped a salvage fleet without firing a shot. A human had been handed ancient power and immediately asked for tools. We had spent years calling Earth primitive because humans repaired what we replaced, reused what we discarded, and trusted stubborn machines long after sensible species gave up. We thought that made them backward. We were wrong. It made them dangerous in a way our empires had forgotten how to measure. Because humans do not just find value in broken things. They stand in the dust, roll up their sleeves, and make the universe admit it was never broken at all. That was when Dockyard 9 learned the truth. Humans do not discover treasure. They wake sleeping monsters, tighten the bolts, and call them machines.